Viruses depend on the host to be able to reproduce. So they're not necessarily truly living things, but they are part of the big microbiome of our Earth. So it's semantics. Are they living? Are they not living? Well, when they get into us, they can reproduce and duplicate anyway, and certainly cause sometimes terrible things and sometimes good symbiotic things. So viruses can pull in little bits of nucleic acid. In the case of the SARS-CoV-2 that we're so worried about right now, that's RNA. And for humans, we talk about our DNA more than our RNA, though we have RNA as well. So they can pull in, they can have deletions as they replicate, things change slightly, just like we evolve. But we evolve over more like millennia, where they're evolving much more rapidly. That's what makes it tricky to be ready for them and then to control them when they do cause disease. When we have, and I think most people think about their own microbiome now. We take probiotics, we try to address our microbiome. Well, viruses are part of our microbiome. But the viruses that we evolved with and have been even maybe more closely related to our own households, our own family lineages, all of those things, we've become more symbiotic with those viruses. So that means we live happily with them. It is sometimes we will get debilitated, and those viruses might trigger and become something that can be causing us illness, a pathogen. But most of the time, pathogens, when we suddenly get exposed to something new, we're the naive host. That's because it's spilled over from another host or from another geographic area. But because we're such a global community now, it's more likely to be from another host, like a wild animal. As we've evolved, we've brought with us those companion animals and food animals, and they've become part of our ecosystem. And so early in history, we were most likely to see emerging infectious diseases coming from those kinds of animals because we were changing the way we lived with them. Most people, even in a lot of places in the world, don't have dogs as pets, at least not in the household. That's changing. But for places like where I live in California, we have dogs, we have cats. Many people eat animals or live with other companion animals like horses. Those we're more used to. We've been exposed to their pathogens. So we're less likely again to see a new disease coming from them. But we're really changing the way we live on the planet. We're altering the whole global ecosystem and living in much more close contact with wildlife, especially urban wildlife that can evolve to live in high density human populations. And then also, as we're pushing out, the human population keeps skyrocketing, we're really pushing out into new areas, or we're increasing our demand for things like great cell phones that are thinner and lighter and all of that, and that takes new minerals, maybe are in a cave that humans hadn't been exposed to before, and the creatures that live in there have their own viruses that don't make them sick, but they can spill over to us. So Marburg virus is very important, causing outbreaks in East Africa, and our team has been looking for viruses like Marburg or the next Marburg all over the world. We particularly focused on countries in Southeast Asia and Africa, and in fact we found Marburg, that specific virus, in West Africa. So they did not know that they had Marburg in West Africa, but we had the history of knowing the hosts, and we were looking for other filoviruses. So Marburg and Ebola are members of the filovirus family. We were looking for those in West Africa, and we found Marburg. Now we're all living in this COVID-19 tragedy, right? And living and sheltering in home because there was a virus out there that spilled over into humans, spread around the world, and we didn't know anything about it. So we didn't have tests for it. We didn't have vaccines for it. We didn't know how to alter our behavior initially to slow it. So that's exactly why we need to know about what viruses are out there before this happens so we can be ready. So it used to be a hard thing to convince people that it needed to happen. Unfortunately, this horrible tragedy is illustrating the point, and I think everyone gets it now, and some are suffering really deeply and personally because of this tragedy. I think the message I like to say is a hopeful one. We can get ahead of this and be ready next time, now that we all understand how important it is. Just like the Marburg situation, when we find Marburg in West Africa, now the communities that we work with know that they have the host of that virus, that they should not interact with that host, and their clinicians, their physicians, know that that should be on their differential list, and the country, the public health system, knows that they should have a test for it. And so that makes them incredibly more prepared for Marburg than they were just a couple years ago when they didn't know it was there. We can know what we're doing to the planet that puts us at risk for getting them. So we can understand those circumstances. And I think that's incredibly important. It's not the wildlife that's doing anything wrong, right? We're using the planet in sort of intensive, heavy-duty ways. And we need to protect ourselves and our futures for climate reasons, but also for these kinds of more immediate health reasons. We're cutting down forests, and we know that when we disrupt an ecosystem, it stresses everything out, including the humans that are coming in there to do that work. Often humans come in with their domestic animals, their chickens, their things that they're going to want to have eggs or eat. And those chickens are not also from that area. All the wildlife in that area are being disrupted. That puts all of those individuals at risk. So that's the kind of perfect storm. It's not so much the pristine areas or the really long-time urban areas that we worry as much about. It's where these changes are happening. Now, part of that change is also the food systems. And as we are moving animals, different animals into food chains, like we saw with this SARS-CoV-2, we worry about that a lot as well, because it's the same kind of thing. You're taking animals out of their natural habitat, you're putting them into tight quarters, mixing them in stressful circumstances with lots of other animals, including humans, that they see as predators, and that causes them to shed virus and potentially cause spillover events to us. Out of this terrible tragedy, we have a call to action. It could have been so much worse. We could have seen a virus that transmits as easily as this one does, which we know is really, really high transmissibility, that is also more deadly. And so we have to take this call to action and be ready for the next one in case it is the more deadly. So what we worry about with influenzas, we see some strains that are very deadly, but they don't transmit easily human to human. We see other strains that transmit easily human to human that are less deadly. We've always been really worried about the remixing and the occasional circumstances where those come together in a way that's dangerous. The same thing can happen with coronaviruses, but also the other viruses that we study that have the potential to get into the human beings and cause disease. From the beginning, I've been sort of trying to preach we shouldn't be worried about one disease. We should be worried about and be prepared for whatever disease comes, because no matter how smart we are, nature is better and is going to outwit us. So we really need to be ready for disease X. And that's what I've been sort of working on for more than a decade, is to try to encourage people to know as much as we can. That's the side of the scientist, right? And where I can make a big contribution. But now fighting to really encourage all of the systems, the public health systems, the diagnostic companies, the vaccine coalitions like CEPI, to be ready. For the past 10 years, we've been working with U.S. Agency for International Development funding with governments in more than 30 countries. And the way that we did that was we engaged with them asked if they were worried and wanted to participate and collaborate with us on finding viruses ahead of time. Those countries unanimously said absolutely. And we worked to pull together, and this is part of the system strengthening, pull together the ministries of health, agriculture, environment, other industries, sometimes it's tourism, getting them together at the table to say, where are we having disease of unknown origin, fevers of unknown origin? How are people interacting? What are the transmission interfaces, the edge effects that we're seeing at those places? Let's get in there and examine how people are interacting with their environment and sample the people and the wild animals, sometimes the domestic animals as well. So we have to train everybody to be super careful, biosecure, safety super high. Then we need to sample the animals, and we need to be careful about that. We can't hurt the animals as we're doing that either. And we get those samples into the laboratory. Then the laboratory needs to get up and running to be able to do viral detection and discovery. And then we have to have mathematical modelers, people like me, other ecologists and epidemiologists to take all that data and say, okay, we're finding real signals here. It sounds really complicated, but what we've been able to do through PREDICT is provide the proof of concept. We now have the protocols. We now understand what we need to do to make a safe workforce. And moving forward, we know how much it will cost to actually find all the viruses in all the countries and all the mammals and birds that could spill over. And we're seeing, of course, now a incredible desire to collaborate, people jumping in and saying, for example, from Bioscanner, the Barcode of Life group, or the Earth Biogenome Project, saying, let's do this together. We were looking to see what was happening with bat diversity. You're looking at the viruses in the bats. Let's do that together. Protect the bats, protect the people. So I really feel great about the future, and that's what we're calling the Global Virome Project, that collaborative effort to come together, contribute all of our own intellectual and sweat equity resources, but we're going to need governments to support that activity all over the world. We could really identify the majority of those risky pathogens for around $1 billion, just over $1 billion. If we wanted to find all of them, which is what I'd like to see done in all of the countries, so it's equitable, that would cost about $4 billion. Now, again, even $4 billion is 10% of what it cost for the first SARS, and minuscule compared to what it's costing us for this tragedy. I'm always worried when we talk about sort of huge bioengineering kind of projects, because if we get rid of a virus, we might make a hole for a more dangerous virus. So what we really need to do is learn to live on this planet in a gentle way that acknowledges what's out there and reduces our risk, in my opinion. Now, that said, once it gets into one of us and is making us really sick, especially if it's your loved one, you want to see a way to tackle that virus in that individual, and we're getting very, very close to that, I think. But again, this is why I think the Global Virome Project is so important. By going out and finding all those viruses, we find not only the ones that make us sick, but we find the ones that don't make us sick. Allows us to really look at and recognize the differences and have great targets for science to attack the ones that are worrisome, and not sort of create whole havoc bio warfare on all viruses, because we need a lot of them, and we don't want to accidentally upset the ecosystems and make something worse. And to understand what we call the One Health concept. So bringing together the different collaborative sectors that recognize that our human, animal, and environmental health, including plants in our food system, are completely inextricably linked, and that we've failed throughout history because we go off in our little ivory towers and we work on just one piece of that. We need to be thinking about it holistically. Now, I think if we don't respond to this terrible tragedy by getting ready for whatever the next one might be, and that is completely possible and feasible, shame on us. And I really think that's another silver lining of this terrible tragedy is that people are really recognizing and collaborating across disciplines, and that will help us for the future.
Thank you.